Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of HealthTech with Purpose. And today we have Sam Shames from Embr Labs. Hi, Sam. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. It's a pleasure to being able to find out time and interview you, Sam, because the work that you've been putting in building Ember Labs has been fantastic, and I was really looking forward to bring this story to our subscribers. Sam, why not we start right from the start? From your days at MIT to building Amber Labs' first prototype. I read somewhere it was a prototyping competition that you participated in, and it was, I think, called Ristify that time. So tell us more about those days and how did you get the idea around the startup?
That'd be my pleasure. So, we came up with the idea for a wearable that heats and cools from being too cold in an over air conditioned lab on campus. This was my co founders and I. We were all engineering students at MIT, and we just kept having to put on sweatshirts in June to stay comfortable and thought, man, what if there could be a better way?
Mm-hmm.
So we said, well, let's try to make a wristband that heats and cools. We built our first prototypes that summer. We certainly didn't think it would become a startup because the name Wristify was just the very first thing we came up with. But we built our first prototypes and we thought it felt really good. We were like, wow, this thing actually works. And then we started to let other folks try it and they said it felt good. And the number one question we would get when we would show the device to someone was, does this work for hot flashes? And that's really in many ways the story of Embr Labs is market pull of this technology we developed for wearable heating and cooling towards hot flashes as a primary use case. So we spent that summer, this is summer 2013, doing the prototyping. We won the prototyping contest in October 2013, and the idea went totally viral. And so from that virality, we started to get emails from people all over the world saying two things. One, temperature is the biggest pain point in my life. And
Mm-hmm.
two, when can I buy this? So that was the moment we realized, okay, hey, there's something more than a student project here. We have to look at actually building this into a startup.
Great. And did you finish your degree or you jumped the gun
I
and
did, yeah. So, we didn't know very much about startups, and it was, the fall of my senior year. So I only had really 1.5 semesters to go. And, we did not have the funding or really the know how. Instead, we really leveraged the resources of MIT. So they have great resources for aspiring entrepreneurs. And we were able to take classes on entrepreneurship and use that to kind of get additional feedback and structure around the idea. And then actually after graduating, we did the summer accelerator at MIT called Delta V, where we were able to get even more dedicated resources towards the startup, including non-dilutive funding and and other elements to help us reach, as they would say, escape velocity.
Great, great. So let's go a bit more deeper around this subject. So, what were those key inflection points technologically as well as commercially that validated your product market fit?
Yeah. So technologically, it was first figuring out how to actually like make a wearable that heats and cools. Because okay, we came up with the idea, but we're like, well, we're not can't be the first people to have this idea. Does this exist? Has it been done before? And certainly people had tried it, but from a technology standpoint, what you realize very quickly is that um, you know cooling especially, but really changing temperature overall is very power intensive. It uses a lot of energy, and if you're looking at it from the perspective of the human body temperature, you realize okay, it's not to actually change the body temperature is just going to require hundreds of watts of power, and that's not really compatible with a wearable device. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what we realized was that actually there's a big difference between changing your body temperature and changing how warm or cold you feel, and that just by changing the temperature of one part of the body, that actually has a system level impact. And so that was our
Right.
insight. And then from there, we figured out, well, what's the best way to change the temperature of one point of the body? It's actually using this idea we invented and patented called thermal waveforms, which is not changing the temperature and cooling in a static manner, but doing it in a dynamic manner. So doing it in a time varying way. So that was
Mm-hmm.
the key technological breakthrough, was this invention of thermal waveforms to, one, reduce the power consumption to make a wearable viable, and then two, to actually make the sensation of temperature more effective at impacting how you feel overall. So that was the key technological breakthrough from the prototyping contest in summer 2013. Then, to actually find product market fit, we had to take that technology, go through a number of prototype iterations, and the next key breakthrough was in 2015 when we had a prototype that was small enough
Mm-hmm.
and robust enough that you could give it to someone for 2 weeks for a field trial and they wouldn't break it. Previous ones would break because they were too delicate. And it was actually small enough and stylish enough that they would wear it. And at the end of that, we would get really good feedback, and people would say, "Yeah, this really worked." And most importantly, we'd say, "Okay, can we have your credit card for a pre-order?" And we got enough people
Mm-hmm.
saying yes that we said, "Okay, that's early signs of product market fit." So that was the next key breakthrough. And then, the third one was actually launching the product on Kickstarter. That was
Mm-hmm.
October of 2017. That was the point when we, actually started to validate demand at scale. Our goal was to raise $100,000, and we ended up raising about $630,000. So very successful campaign. We had over 2,800 backers, and we're really proud of that traction.
Great, great. No, that's fantastic. And, there are such stories where, things falling in place so nicely. Of course, there would be a lot of struggle behind it. You make it sound so direct and easy. So tell us more about, in fact, the whole journey around taking it from the prototype to FDA grade performance and real clinical partnership. So what was your go-to market? Were you right away, busy with the FDA approval and everything, or were you able to test it with real users before that? Like, how did that aspect of it?
Yeah, so we actually decided not to go the FDA route. So even today, we're a consumer wellness device. We don't have FDA approval. We do have in the US HSA and FSA reimbursement.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that really came from that very beginning of just feeling the market pull of saying, okay, hey, we have people who are ready to give us money.
Mm-hmm.
And if we look at the cost structure and what it will cost to make the device, and what we think we can sell it for, we can make healthy margins. So let's take the faster path to market.
Mm-hmm.
What we did do, though, as you mentioned, is we have done a good amount of clinical validation. And that was something that was really in our DNA very early on as scientists and engineers from MIT. We wanted to know, is this just a placebo effect? We'd read the scientific literature and, understand the physiological basis for what we were doing. And at the same time, we really wanted to make sure that our device, embodied it. So we structured a lot of our own initial field trials to get data. And then from that, really the first breakthrough was getting a SBIR grant from the National Science Foundation. So that's a non-dilutive funding that enabled us to collaborate with researchers at the UC Berkeley Center for the Built Environment to do a really rigorous study on thermal comfort and looking at, for people who are uncomfortably warm or cold, using our first generation device, what impact does it have on their perceived comfort? And the results were really impressive. We showed that wearing our first generation device could make someone feel the equivalent of 5 degrees Fahrenheit more comfortable. So that means if you're in a room that's, say, 72 degrees Fahrenheit and you find that too warm, using cooling with the original Embr Wave would make you feel as if it was 67. And the person next to you could be warming and feel as though it's 77. So you're expanding the comfort zone of a room by almost 10 degrees, which is enormously beneficial for individual comfort. So that was the first study we did with thermal comfort. And then since that time, we've done a number of other clinical studies with academic partners, including studies on natural menopause, looking at hot flashes and sleep. That was in collaboration with Johnson and Johnson. We've done studies looking at the impact for prostate cancer patients dealing with hot flashes, for breast cancer patients. We've looked at sleep in the general population, and even dysautonomia, which is a thermoregulatory disorder. So at this point, we have, I believe, 7 published clinical studies and have really built up a body of evidence around the effectiveness of Embr Wave for different elements of people's thermal experience, whether that's comfort, hot flashes, sleep, or more serious medical issues related to the thermoregulatory system.
Nice, nice. So, tell us more about the partnerships that you had with J&J and Walgreens. So, what has been your biggest GTM lessons for fellow founders?
Absolutely. So, we started with Kickstarter and then we really just focused on our website for the first couple of years. And I think that's a very important lesson is, try to find a channel that you can own so you can just have a complete life cycle relationship with the customer, especially for a first generation device. We wanted to, from first awareness through customer support, know as much as we could about the customer, and that was critical. Then I think the second piece was leveraging that to attract inbound attention from other channels. So, Johnson and Johnson came to us because they were at the time looking for menopause offerings and they wanted to explore a potential partnership. The same thing happened with Walgreens Boots Alliance, that through Number Seven, which is a skincare brand they own in the UK, they again were looking for menopausal solutions. So we leveraged our traction on our direct to consumer channel to um, develop inbound leads for partnerships, and have kind of then pursued those.
Mm-hmm,
Um, Eventually, with the second generation device, we did start to go omni-channel. And
mm-hmm,
so today the product's widely available. But I would really caution doing that with a first generation because you're giving up margin, but even more so, you're really giving up control.
mm-hmm,
And it's a lot more to manage in terms of all of the complexity of different product listings and positioning and offers and pricing, not to mention just really knowing the customer and actually when someone comes to the question, being able to go and trace their order and their history, as opposed to someone who for example bought on Amazon and comes to you and you've got no idea sort of how they became aware of the product or very much about them.
Okay, great. So what I understand, so like, did you do any deliberate effort towards these partnerships, or they basically came in more like inbound once your product was already, like available in the market and like making heads turn? So the companies reached out to you through their own research.
Well, I would say, the initial contact was them reaching out to us, but then we put in a tremendous amount of effort. So, the initial contact was, hey, we want to learn more, to actually then go from, that interest to a final partnership, whether it's them selling the product or doing clinical research together, was an enormous effort. It's very true that the speed and characteristic time scale of a startup compared with a large company is very different. And so, you really have to be willing to be very patient, to go through a long process with multiple cycles for contract review and legal review and different stakeholders, and occasionally there's a corporate restructuring. So, patience is the name of the game. And of course, on the other side of that, you can get a really strong outcome when you can point to a partnership and revenue from a multinational company with a global brand.
Mhm. Right, right. Great. So how do you currently balance your DTC growth with enterprise and clinical partnerships? Like, if you could share, like, is it more now B2B driven, or is it more DTC still?
Yeah, it's evolved over time. So again, it started with all DTC. Then we started to get some corporate interest, some more on the clinical side. So that was more, call it, engineering services revenue or research services. Then we started to open up indirect channels, and we started to see some really good wholesale revenue. Now it's sort of shifted back to some more balance, and part of how that occurred was really strategically looking and saying, okay, how do we re-differentiate our direct to consumer channel? Because if we're selling the same product as our wholesale partners on Amazon.com and BestBuy.com and Walmart.com. What is the incentive for the customer
Right.
to buy from our website? And price isn't really sufficient. So we developed this hardware as a service model where rather than owning the product outright, customers have the option to pay $20 a month for ongoing access. That
Mm-hmm.
basically gives them not only a device, a working device with a lifetime warranty, but a new device every 2 years, some added perks in our rewards program, as well as some exclusive giveaways and other content. And so that's been really successful. It's only available on our website. We launched it last year, and in about the first 8 months, we grew it from basically zero to almost 15,000 subscribers for almost a 4 million ARR run rate.
Great, great. No, that's great. And like during this journey, so do you see that like there's more value into building like turning a hardware startup into SaaSifying it? Like, do you see the like do you see it as an advice you would like to give others as well, or you feel that this is more unique to your product?
Yeah, I think any hardware company should try it. I think the broader lesson here is that for a long time, we were just a one-time sale product company, and we had accessories, but we didn't have ongoing revenue. And
Mm-hmm.
that model is just incredibly challenging. There's this likely going to be a strong misalignment between the value creation for your customers and your value capture. And if you're delivering value over a long period of time, you really need to find a way to capture that value in an ongoing basis. And obviously today you've seen the Whoops of the world and the Auras of the world and even like the Eight Sleeps of the world. It's a pretty common playbook for the hardware company to have some sort of subscription component. That was
Right,
not the case in 2019 when we were starting to work on the Generation 2 device. And so we've had to adapt. The hardware
right.
as a service is a really nice model because, what we've seen is like basically there's customer segmentation in terms of desire to own and not own hardware. That
Mhm.
we originally thought, oh, you could have one or you could have the other, but it's really just actually a way to reach more customers. That some people, it's a benefit to not own the device and to be able
Mhm.
to send it back and to have the flexibility to cancel. And so, actually offering that as a basically product offering is a way to kind of further capture additional market share.
Mm. Right, right. Okay, but in specifying it, do you run the risk of someone, let's say, get taking the device and let's say not paying for the subscription or something? Like, do you have, maybe some percentage of bed revenue?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There is a delinquency component. We work with an amazing partner and they help us with that with some front end screening. So
Mm,
it is a trade off and a tuning you have to make. And you have to
mm,
be careful up front that, a couple bad cohorts can really negatively impact your cash flows and your unit economics. Um, at the same time, there's ways to both screen up front. There's ways to,
right,
really encourage people to give the device back and to escalate. And those are all things that you kind of need to balance. So that's why this is sort of a model. I can't prescribe it for everyone, and
right.
what we've seen obviously much more in the marketplace is more like you buy the hardware and then there's some software component that's an ongoing payment, and that certainly works as well.
Right, right. Great. So, Sam, what would be one piece of advice you'd like to give to entrepreneur who's starting today? Maybe imagine someone coming out of MIT today and ask you the major learnings that you had in your journey.
Yeah, I think the one piece of advice that comes to mind, especially for, let's say, a technical founder, someone coming out of MIT or an engineer, is to really focus first and foremost on the customer. It's
Mm.
so easy as engineers to just want to build cool stuff and to want to develop interesting technology. And what often happens is you wind up with something great that no one wants to buy.
Right.
And we were really fortunate to get that advice early on enough that it completely shifted our mindset, right? We started with technology for a prototyping contest. And then,
Mhm.
we had a prototype for wearable heating and cooling. And we thought, okay, we're ready to launch a product. And the advice we were told was, no, 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 no. You need to go interview multiple hundred people who've said, I want this, and figure out what exactly do they want. And that just completely transformed our understanding of the product requirements and the user experience. And all of that led to the engineering and the design and the technology. And so if you can go deep with primary market research and understanding the customer, that will help you build a much better product and, of course, a much better company.
Mhm. Great. And what would be some myths around hardware startups in particular? Because I still believe that a software startup has lesser moving pieces as compared to building a hardware startup. So, what are some major myths around hardware startups and how to go about specifically building hardware startups?
Yeah, absolutely. So hardware startups, as you mentioned, right, you're dealing in the world of atoms, not just bits. So
Mhm.
there's sort of significantly more complexity there. And I would say that the first piece is to focus on, um, it's still to focus on the customer, because what you find, and what I think some of the best hardware startups are able to do, is actually validate the market in parallel or before starting the design. Because the challenge with hardware is it's a bit of a chicken and egg, right? You need capital to launch the product, to build the product, and significantly more capital than a software startup. But on the other hand, how do you raise the capital if you haven't shown there's a market? So if you can use renderings or use the MVP approach or field trials or prototypes and demonstrate that, okay, you have paying customers, if you can just build this, that is going to significantly improve your odds of success. Um, I think people maybe underestimate um, what you can do with low fidelity prototypes or renderings, especially these days, right? You should be able to build your whole landing page and be driving customers through it and marketing and building in public. And I think that just ultimately helps bring people along in the journey and shows your traction. Um, and then I think the last piece is just that there's tremendous upside for hardware startups, that in the worlds of vibe coding, it's never been easier to build software, which also means it's never been less defensible.
Right.
Hardware, just by its nature, is more defensible. And if you combine hardware plus a subscription software, you can end up with a really powerful business, because people become, I'd say, more attached to
Mhm.
hardware products, right? Like, because it's a physical object, you can just build a much stronger physical connection with your customer, and that translates to loyalty, to lifetime value, and willingness to pay.
Right, right. No, that's fantastic. Sam, I came across this news recently. Embr has secured some major patents. So, if you would like to share in a more layman language around what these patents represent in terms of where the wearable health tech is headed, and like some more understanding of Embr Labs' next steps.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been really fortunate to build a robust IP portfolio. Today we have, I believe, 18 patents granted, utility patents across the US and international jurisdictions. I talked about that foundational research around thermal waveforms. Since
Mm-hmm.
that time, we've really built around that, and some of our most recent patents have been around AI. And that's something we're really excited about and have talked publicly about. What we've developed is basically AI to predict hot flashes, then deliver heating and cooling. And one way to think about this is, we have the foundation model for temperature from all of the user data we have, all of our insights, 20 million hours of heating and cooling, that we can then start to use to say, okay, what would it look like to start to, do, call it thermal inference, to heat and cool people on demand to help them regulate. And that, I think, is part of what that recent patent's about, is some of the key enabling technologies to deliver temperature as a service, you might say, or to really deliver the perfect heating and cooling before you know you need it.
Right. Great, great. No, that's good to know. So, you talked about AI. Maybe let's take a question around AI. So, like your product collects physiological data, and what's your philosophy around where the thin line is between helpful and invasive? Because especially around, the more deeper we are going, it becomes more like a ethical responsibility in connected health.
Yeah, you know, it's such a important question, and the privacy element is really critical, right? You can put on your consumer hat and say, what do you want the product you interact to know about your most personal health information? What I believe, come to believe, is it really comes down to two things. One is, understanding the permission your customer is giving you and really being explicit about that and saying, hey, this is what I'm asking you for and this is why. And then really keeping that promise of saying, okay, you've got this data, you have a responsibility. Are you doing everything you can to keep it safe and secure? Following all security best practices, giving people the rights to have their data deleted. And I think if you can do those two things, that's a really good starting point. So be very clear about what you're collecting and why and how you're going to use it, and then make sure that you are treating it with the same care and responsibility that your personal data, that you would want for your personal data.
So, Sam, into a next part, provide us a bit more insight into the operations aspect of the company, like being able to build $1 million company. What kind of team setup you have, and what are those key roles really that are required to build a successful hardware startup? Specifically, if there's any particular role that you feel that people undervalue that impact, but is really important for the success for a hardware company.
We've seen our team evolve over the years depending on the stage of the company. So for a
Hmm.
long time, it was just co-founders and I, and we kind of broadly split the responsibility into three ways. One was business, one was sort of product customer, and then one was sort of engineering science.
Hmm.
Um, that in some ways is still a bit of a divide, that you've got sort of the core business operations functions, you have the product go to market revenue side, and then you have the technology, the IP, the science. How the staffing specifically has evolved within those has varied over time. When we were doing a lot of product development and bringing new product to market, it was heavier on the engineering side, making sure we had the right mechanical engineers, the right software firmware engineers, the right systems engineers. Then, as we shifted more to focus on the go-to-market, it's building up the marketing team. But the sort of the key elements there of who's sort of responsible for building the product, understanding the go-to-market, who's responsible for actually like the technical side and the engineering, and then who's really thinking about the business and operations, HR, finance, raising the money. So those three pieces, I would say, are still sort of the key elements, right? Someone who really understands the market and the customer and can say this is what we should be building, someone to build it, and then someone who really can kind of piece together the business side of that.
Great, great. So, I do have a quick rapid fire for you, Sam. So,
Right.
a few trivia questions. So, first question first, favorite wearable tech beside Emberwave?
Favorite wearable tech besides Ember Wave? I've been trying out an Aura Ring. I've been really enjoying the data on sleep and just the nudges to think more carefully about how the choices I'm making are impacting that sleep and recovery.
Most impactful book that you have read?
Um, Say from a business standpoint, I really enjoyed this book called Monetizing Innovation. It's all about how companies can build the product around the pricing model.
On An entrepreneur you admire?
I've come to really admire Brian Chesky. I mean, maybe a little cliche at this point with what he said about founder mode, but he just
Mhm,
seems like a really incredible leader and someone who obviously has built an amazing company and done so in a really thoughtful way.
mhm. A shout out to people who were important in this journey.
I got to give a shout out to the team in the material science and engineering department at MIT at MadMech, so Mike Tarkanian and the whole staff who started us on this journey and who you know gave us the resources to build our first prototypes and then sort of guided us towards the entrepreneurship resources at MIT.
Great. Thank you so much, Sam. That's a wrap up. Last question. What's the best way to reach out to you? And do you offer some sort of mentorship, advisory to companies who would like to learn from you? What's a typical way to get your help if someone is building a hardware startup, especially today?
Yeah, would the best way to reach me is LinkedIn. I try to always keep up with my DMs and would certainly welcome the chance to talk with other hardware startups. I feel really grateful for all of the help I got and we've got and still get from folks who are maybe further along in their journeys. And so I try to be a good community member and pay it forward. So I'm always open to having conversations and potentially to more formal opportunities for advising as well. So yeah, please looking forward to hearing from the audience.
Thank you so much, Sam. It was a great, insightful episode, and we look forward and wish you best for the mission.
Thank you for having me.